You thought you got rid of me, but not so fast, eh? For those of you that don't know me, my name is Bryan, and it's just my joy to be back here again and bringing you the word this morning. We're going to be in Mark chapter 5 here this morning. Have you ever found yourself lost? Maybe metaphorically speaking, you found yourself lost in life, right? You just didn't quite know where you were in life, how to get out of where you were in life, and we can use that in a metaphorical term. Or maybe physically, right? You've got lost and you didn't know where you were, didn't know how to get out because you didn't know where you were. But sometimes we can get lost when we do know where we are, right? And we want to get somewhere, but we don't know how to get to where it is that we want to go. And we kind of look around, but no one's really there willing to help us, or maybe not even able to help us. A few years ago, my wife and I and our two youngest kids, we went to Disneyland for a trip, right? And we flew into LAX, and we had that afternoon before going to Disneyland, so we thought we'd drive down the coast and that, and we drove out to Santa Monica. Anyone been to Santa Monica? It's pretty, right? And we went on the pier and on the beach and had lunch and came back to the car, and one of our kids was looking for his backpack in the car, and has anyone seen my backpack? And it's like, no. And then I was looking for my backpack, and I couldn't find my backpack either. And it suddenly dawned on us that we'd been robbed, that somehow somebody had got into the car and nicked our stuff. And in my backpack was my MacBook, which wasn't so great, right? Because, you know, it was during the week, but I was going to work on a sermon during that time in the evenings then. And I was also taking a seminary class, and that night I happened to have a quiz, which was really important for me to take because I was kind of focused on really getting a good grades. Yeah, I hold my hand up. So anyway, it didn't put us in a good mood, right, for the beginning of our little mini holiday there. And we drove to Anaheim, and we found our Airbnb, you know, in Anaheim, and it was in this massive, condo complex, you know, where all these roads look the same, and all the condos look the same. And anyway, I worked out how to take the test on my phone, the quiz, and didn't do very well because my mind was in a different place, and I was really frustrated. And sometimes when I get like that, I don't know about you, and just angry and frustrated and down about the whole thing, I just have to get out and go somewhere, right? Whether I walk or whether I drive or wherever, it doesn't matter, I just go. And that's what I did. I said to Leslie, I have to go. And out the front door, shut the door, down the road, just kept walking for like an hour and a half until finally I cooled down. And it was February, and I cooled down physically too. It was like 10 o'clock at night by this time. And it suddenly dawned on me, where am I? And what am I doing here? And I put my hand in my pocket, and where my wallet usually is, it was empty. And then I put my hand in my other pocket, where my phone usually is, that was empty too. And I'd left it all behind in the condo. And then I thought, where is that condo? And what is the number of that condo and the name of the street and all of that? And I actually didn't know where it all was. And this slight twinge of, anxiety, I suppose, crept over me, and I looked around the neighborhood I was in at this time of night, and I was thinking, well, this is maybe not the best place to be either, right? And so I found myself had been driven out, with this spirit of anger and frustration, and suddenly I was in this place where I really probably didn't want to be, and yet I really didn't know how to get back to where I wanted to be. And this morning I want to look at a text where a man, he's not lost in Anaheim, but he's lost actually in a graveyard, and he's been driven out there because he is possessed by demons. Let's read the texts and then we'll jump into it. Mark chapter 10, verse 1 through 20. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. And they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and the people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who'd been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. Dustin texted me a few weeks ago just to check that I was going to be here this Sunday. And I texted him back, yeah, I'll be here. So, by the way, it's fantastic to be back and see all you guys. Missed you. But I asked him, I said, well, is there anything particularly you want me to speak on, or any text or subject or whatever it is? And he said that maybe we were looking at loving difficult people, right? And the question was, well, who did Jesus find difficult to love? That was his question in the text. And it set me thinking, well, who did Jesus find difficult to love? And I was chatting with a friend of mine, and we chatted over coffee about this subject, about who Jesus might have felt difficult to love. Someone more difficult than others, right? The first one that springs to my mind maybe is Judas. Well, he was a thief, and he was sneaking around behind Jesus' back. And, if you've ever been deeply betrayed by somebody, you know how much that hurts, right? How difficult it is to love someone like that. And yet Jesus did love Judas. He had him in his discipleship group. Judas saw firsthand. He even had Judas at the Last Supper, knowing that Jesus was going to betray him. You might think, well, John, he'd have been an easy one to love, right? Because John even says that he was the beloved disciple. And yet John had his moments too, right? Him and his brother were called the sons of thunder. They wanted to call down fire and lightning on a village that rejected Jesus. And at Jesus' critical moment, they were more concerned about promoting themselves into Jesus' leadership team than they were about what was going on with Jesus. It's kind of hard to love someone, isn't it, that's so wrapped up in their own lives that they don't notice what's going on in your life. Thomas, I don't know, the fatalist, the glass half empty bloke. I mean, show me, right? Unless you show me, I don't really believe it. Think maybe he might be hard to love, or Matthew, who used to work for the deep state, if you like, right? And he was one of us and shouldn't be working for those people ripping us off. And yet Jesus loved Matthew, loved Thomas. He loved Simon the Zealot, who was the political one. He loved them all. He even loved Peter. We might think of Peter and, 1 minute he's all gung-ho and then the next minute he's like trailing away, isn't he? Sometimes it's easy to love people that maybe your enemies because you know where you're at with them, right? But the people that say that, oh, let's go, I'm for you, and then you look around in the critical moment and they're not for you at all, it's harder to love those people. And yet Jesus loved Peter. And he loved other groups too. He even loved the Pharisees. I know we think that he didn't love the Pharisees, but he spent an inordinate amount of time with the Pharisees. And he loved Jerusalem. In fact, the last time he went to Jerusalem, he cried out, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing." Jesus loved those who were going to reject him, were going to try him falsely, and going to crucify and kill him. Because I think my conclusion is that for Jesus, we're all equally hard to love. Because the reason is we are all sinners. And we've all fallen short of the glory of God. And yet for some bonkers reason, God doesn't stop loving us. Jesus doesn't stop loving us. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? When you really think about it, that God would still love us so much, right? As John says, that he would give his only son so that whoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. That does my mind in, frankly, when I really think about that, how much God loves us. And he loved us before we loved him. That's what the Bible teaches us, isn't it? That while we were still sinners, God loved us. And he shows for us the love for us that Christ died for us. And despite the enormous difficulty of God loving us, he still loves us so much. And that's the good news here this morning, isn't it? That God loves us that much. That much. And we can never get away from that. It never gets old to hear that, does it? Or it shouldn't. How can Jesus love us that much? I've recently read this book called Jayber Crow by Wendell Berry. Anybody read Wendell Berry at all? No? Well, anyway, in this book, Jayber, he's this small-town barber, and you know how it is in a barber shop, everyone's talking, and so he knows the whole town's business. And he loves this woman called Mattie, but Mattie is married to another bloke called Troy, and so Jayber has to love her from afar, right? And Mattie's husband, Troy, he's kind of all about himself, and he's not a particularly nice bloke, and he's somebody that's hard to love. And yet, because Jayber loves Mattie, he feels like he should love Troy because Mattie loves Troy, her husband. And yet, Troy ratchets up these bad things, and it gets to the point where Jayber says, "I did not love Troy Chatham. I was no longer capable of the effort of will it took to understand why Mattie did, which would sooner or later remind me that I could not understand why God did. And that was my sanity." In our bonkers world this morning, that's our sanity. That whether we can understand it or not, It's the truth that God loves us. Now when we talk about loving people, often we bring into whether we like them, because we all have different personalities, and some of our personalities get on better than others, or whether they're part of our family, or whether they share the same interests and that kind of stuff. But Jesus doesn't love that way, does he? His love is completely different. So I think the question is not so much who does Jesus find difficult to love, but who do I find difficult to love? And what can Jesus show me about loving people that I find difficult to love, so that I can love them like Jesus loves them? Well, maybe this story in Mark gives us 3 good pointers about how we could do that. And sometimes I don't love people because, frankly, it's inconvenient. The story starts that they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. Now, they'd come from Capernaum, right, which was on the other side of the Lake of Galilee. And Jesus, the previous evening, had said to his disciples, let's go over to the other side. And in my mind, I know it's not necessarily in the text, but in my mind, it's a nice, calm evening, and the sun's setting, and the disciples go, we got nothing else better to do. That's convenient for us. We'll just pop in the boat and go over the other side and see what Jesus wants. Of course, in the middle of the night, right, this enormous storm comes on the boat, doesn't it? And Jesus is asleep in the boat, and that they're concerned that the waves are slopping in. In fact, they think it's curtains, don't they? And they wake Jesus up. Aren't you worried, right? Don't you care? We're all about to go under. And Jesus calms the wind, and he calms the seas, and he shows that he is sovereign over nature. And now here they are on the other side of the lake, and it's geographically kind of inconvenient, but this is also the Gentile side of the lake, and so not only is it geographically inconvenient, it's also culturally inconvenient too, because they're good Jews, and what are we doing? And maybe we should have stayed home, because that would have been much, much more convenient. It's kind of hard to love people, isn't it, when it's inconvenient, when it doesn't fit in your time or what you're doing. For those of you who don't know, you may have heard that that I'm English, and I've just recently spent 2 months back in London for first time for a long time. Actually, I've spent that long time, and my wife and I, we had been to see this concert, and we were sitting outside a pub and just relaxing after the concert and chatting about it. And this panhandler comes up, and he starts to want money and stuff from us. And, and we were deep in conversation, and we didn't want to be disturbed, right? And kind of dismissed him to go away because it's not convenient, right? I don't want to show my love to him because he's interrupting me and he's not on my schedule. Have you ever not loved someone because it was inconvenient for you to love them? Sometimes the inconvenience is geographical. God calls us to go somewhere, but it's not really convenient for us to go there. It takes time, it takes resources. Maybe it's difficult, hardships, right? Different culture, different language that we have to navigate through. Maybe it's through a storm even. And it's inconvenient for us. This church I go to when I'm in London, they've planted part of a church. It's like outside in this town, they're planting another church. And it takes, 2 hours to get to this other town. And it's not that convenient because that's like 4 hours out of your day to go and be part of that plant. And yet that's what they feel like God's called them to do. It'd be much easier if they just planted it down the road, but that's not where God has led. And yet even if it is down the road, right, it can still be inconvenient, can't it? You ever cross the road because you've seen someone up on the pavement and you thought, uh-oh, I don't want to bump into them? I mean, sometimes it's prudent, walking in Portland, sometimes I've seen someone up in front of me, like clearly not having a good day and with some kind of possible weapon in their hands, and it's prudent maybe to cross over to the other side of the road. But sometimes it's just because you see them and they don't dress the same as you, or they don't look the same as you. Or maybe I'm just too busy. And I've got my calendar, and I've got my schedule, and I've got to get from A to B, and I just don't have time built into my schedule to stop and love someone that I meet on the way. Because you can only love on my schedule. How inconvenient do you think it was for Jesus to love us? How inconvenient do you think it was for Jesus to leave heaven and come to earth? To be born and live as a peasant? How inconvenient do you think it was for him to suffer abuse and trials and desertion and false conviction and crucifixion and death? Do you think that was inconvenient for him? And yet, when Jesus arrived, it actually was the convenient time. Because everything in God's history of time had been building up to that moment. It was all about loving us. That's incredible, isn't it? From the very moment that Adam and Eve said, no, that's all right, we'll do things our way, it was all about redeeming human beings. It was all about God's love. In fact, Paul writes, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoptions as sons and daughters. You would think it would be inconvenient for God to love us, and yet that was his whole focus. Because it's never inconvenient for us to love like Jesus. The second reason, I think, why we don't love like Jesus is because of isolation. He arrives on the shore and he's greeted by a man who's not normal. This man is isolated, isn't he? He does strange things, perhaps. He says strange things. He dresses or doesn't dress strangely. He lives in this strange place, a graveyard, and no one goes there anyway, and especially with him being there, they take a wide berth around him, and he is isolated. You ever, avoided somebody? I mean, we just talked about that, crossing the street, or maybe you've seen someone come to your door and pretended that you weren't home, right? You maybe didn't answer your phone because you didn't want to talk to that person. What happens to someone in isolation? Well, the Apostle Peter actually tells us in the 5th chapter of his letter. He says, your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. And we know that's what predators do, don't they? They want to isolate their prey, get them away, and then they've got them. And when you're isolated, bad things happen. Think about that at the very beginning with Adam and Eve, right? The enemy, he isolated them. He isolated them from God, and then he isolated Eve from Adam. Because we were created for community. It's not good for man to be alone, that's what God said. And it's not just about marriage, although obviously marriage was needed to procreate, but it's about community, right? It's not good for any of us to be alone. We need each other. We need deep community. That's what we were created for. And when we're alone, we become vulnerable. And we become vulnerable especially if our circumstances are difficult. And evil spirits enter into our minds, and we can go off on strange tangents, right? And we can do things which damage ourselves and which damage other people, and we can go wandering off into the streets in the middle of the night and get lost, right? And isolated, and worse, far worse. And sometimes what isolates us is internal, isn't it? Like shame and guilt, fear perhaps, or the past can isolate us. And it keeps us locked away in that space, away from other people. Think about loneliness today. You know, I keep reading how loneliness is kind of an epidemic today. And anger, how does that isolate us? Again, confess myself, right? Back in Anaheim, stomping along the road, I came across a chap, a few weeks ago, and he was angry about some perceived, whether it was real or perceived, I don't know, but something that had happened to him in the past, and it isolated him. It kept him separate from everybody else. He was like Jonah sitting outside, waiting for God's retribution to come down. And when we feel isolated, sometimes we try and fix that, right, with substances and different activities, and we think that that's going to bring us back, and it doesn't. It actually isolates us even more. And sometimes isolation comes because of physicality, of illness and health. I see in old age, right, that people's worlds shrink when they lose their mobility and they become isolated and vulnerable. Or maybe it's immigrants and don't know the culture, don't know the language, don't know how to fit in, and they feel isolated. Sometimes those people are isolated not because they're hidden away. They can be right in front of us, and yet we don't realize how isolated they feel inside, and it can be so easy for us to miss. And as I said, when people are isolated, then the enemy has an entrance into their lives. He knows he has them where they want them. But Jesus wasn't and isn't prepared to leave people in isolation. Like this man. I don't know how Jesus knew about this man on the far side of the lake who probably wasn't even a Jew. I don't know, and it doesn't matter. We could chat about that all day long, but we don't know. But Jesus did know. And Jesus was not prepared to leave that man to the devil. And all those people that Jesus came across that were isolated, he was not prepared to leave them to the devil. He makes a beeline for people who are isolated. The ones who are isolated by the Jewish authorities. No one is too isolated for Jesus to reach. And that's what God has been doing for years and years and years and years. One of my favorite psalms is Psalm 107. I just encourage you to go and read that later. It talks about people who are isolated, some of them through their own fault, right? Some of them through circumstances, and yet they cry out to God, and God goes and finds them and reaches them and rescues them. And you know who suffered the ultimate isolation? Jesus Christ himself. As he cried out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. And why did Jesus face the ultimate isolation? So that we don't have to. So that we don't have to. And that's the good news, isn't it? That we don't have to be separated from God. And because of what Jesus has done, we don't have to be separated from each other. And that's what the church is all about, isn't it? It's about being a community. It's about the fact that we don't have to be isolated from God, and we don't have to be isolated from each other. And we're on this rescue mission now, and we're looking out for people who are isolated out there, all around us, right? Because I don't know about you, but I don't want the devil to have them. And Jesus doesn't want the devil to have them. And so that's our mission, is to love like Jesus and look for people in isolation. And lastly, to love like Jesus means for us not to be intimidated. Jesus is greeted, isn't he, by this bloke, and he comes running down at full tilt, and then he dives before Jesus, and he knows Jesus' name, and he's trying to use Jesus' name to gain control over Jesus. And Jesus finds out there's not just one demon in this bloke, but there's many demons in this bloke. And there's this strange negotiation about where they're going to go. And I don't know, we're not going to get sidetracked in the weeds on that one. And anyway, Jesus agrees, and they go in the pigs, and the pigs all rush over the cliff into the sea. And really what Jesus is showing is that he not only has the power over the wind and the waves, but he also has power over spiritual demons, right? And it also reveals just what those demons are all about, that they want to destroy life. That they want to destroy life. They don't want human beings to flourish as God intended human beings to flourish. And they will intimidate that any way they can to try and stop that from happening. How do you react to intimidation when someone tries to intimidate you? You know, when I told you that when my wife and I were sitting outside, and that panhandler came up, and he started to get really kind of belligerent, and he just wouldn't go away, and he just wouldn't leave us alone. And then he started being rude to Leslie, and just like I started to get angry in return, right? And it is easy to do that when someone's trying to intimidate. Meet intimidation with intimidation, right? Or the other way is that we could just withdraw. It's like, well, I don't have anything to do with that angry person. I'm just going to back off and go away and hop back in the boat and row away as quickly as I can, right? You know, this church plant I was telling you about, part of it is going around and knocking on doors, inviting people to come to this church, which I'll have to confess as an introvert is probably one of my least favorite activities in the whole world to do. And some of the responses that we get when we knock on the door are kind of intimidating, right? They have questions, and sometimes they're just rude, and it's easy to forget that this person is made by God in his image, just like I'm made by God in his image. When Paul was in Ephesus, and great things were happening in Ephesus, miraculous things were happening in Ephesus, and including exorcisms and driving out evil spirits, and these 7 sons of Sceva thought they'd get in on the action, and they went to try and drive out an evil spirit, and this evil spirit said, well, I know Jesus, and I know who Paul is, but you are who exactly? And this evil spirit beat up these 7 sons. It was intimidating, right? And firstly, I think we need to remember, right, that we don't fight against flesh and blood. That's what Paul says. We fight against principalities and powers that it's hard for us even to conceive of. And it's intimidating. And yet, Jesus has overcome all of that. He is the supreme power. We needn't be intimidated because Jesus has overcome it. And when the townspeople hear about the pigs, they're kind of intimidated, aren't they? They come out and they find Jesus, and they find this man in his right mind, and he's clothed, and they go, we want you to leave, Jesus. We don't want you here. And so what does Jesus do? Does he try and intimidate them into his kingdom? No. He gets in his boat and he leaves. And you might think, well, is that a loving thing to do? Just to leave them like in their own situation, the way that they were, without any more, without like trying to fight for them at all? I mean, I think on the one hand, Jesus respects them, right? That God gives us our own autonomy. That's what love is about. I was surprised when we were knocking on these doors how many people said that they were atheists. And yet, as you dug into that a little bit and had conversations with people, it turned out they're not necessarily really atheists. They just never really considered like greater things in life, like where they came from and where they're going and what their purpose is, and anything more than just the here and now. Until we showed up and start asking some questions. And the enemy has kept them isolated there, right? And that's all they think about is the here and now. And suddenly they're confronted with this different view about a sovereign God and the possibility of eternity and what all that's about. And that can be intimidating, doesn't it? Because if all this Jesus business is right and true, then it has some implications about the way you live your life and about what you should be doing here and now. I think Miriam was chatting a few months ago, right, about how to recognize where people are on their spiritual journey, right? So in the other words, it's like if someone hasn't even considered anything about spirituality, there's really no point in talking to them about sin and the Bible and the authority of the Bible when they have absolutely no idea what they're talking about, right? You have to meet them where they're at. Otherwise, it's just right over their heads. See, Jesus had another plan for these people that he was rowing away from. And this plan involved the man that he just cast the demons out of, because he wanted to go with Jesus, right? He begged to go with Jesus. I mean, why wouldn't he? Because, his own people seemed to care more about their pigs than they did about him. Except Jesus said, no, I don't want you coming with me. You need to stay here. And you need to go and tell people about what God has done for you. And we read that the man went around, and he went around that whole area, not just his friends, but the whole of Decapolis, the whole of this Gentile area, telling people about what Jesus had done for him. It was his testimony, right? And that's where we come in, isn't it? We're here this morning because Jesus wants us to share his love with those around us, and simply by telling people what Jesus has done for him. We don't need degrees in theology. We don't need to have everything down. This man didn't really know who Jesus was, right? He was a Gentile probably, and yet he was probably the first evangelist commissioned by Jesus to go out and tell people what Jesus had done for him. He was obedient. The Apostle Paul, he was hit by Jesus' love on the way to Damascus, and it changed his life. And I don't know, when I think of the Apostle Paul, I think of him as a bit intimidating, don't you? It's like, wow. And yet, that's not how Paul saw himself. He said, to the weak, I become weak that I might win the weak. I've become all things to all people that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel that I might share with them in all its blessing. We don't have to be intimidated to love like Jesus. I found my way back to the condo complex, and like I said, there were literally hundreds and hundreds of condos that all looked the same, and it was all laid out the same. The roads all looked the same, and so I kind of wandered up and down praying, and it was really late by now, so it's like, well, I can't make a mistake, and ring on somebody's doorbell at like 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was by then, because then I'll be I will find somewhere for the night, but it won't be what I want. And so I was wandering around, and it's too bad Caleb's not here, because he'd really like this part, right? You'll have to tell him, And I was going past, and I looked at this upstairs window, and I saw this duck's towel hanging in the upstairs window. And somehow I just knew that William had hung that towel up in the window. It's probably the one thing he had left, too. And I knew that that was the condo. And sure enough, I rang the doorbell, and Leslie opened the door. "Where have you been?" I was like, well, So many people around us, whether they realize it or not, are just looking for a sign that someone loves them, that there is a God that loves them, that Jesus loves them. And we actually are part of the answer to that, aren't we? To love like Jesus, even when it's inconvenient, even when people are isolated, and even when it's intimidating. Will we love like Jesus? We're going to play a song, right? The elements of communion are over there on the table. Just invite you to go and get those right during this song, and bring them back to your seat. Don't take them just yet, we'll take them together. But just consider now what it means to love like Jesus.